Two people wake up at exactly 6 in the morning. One reaches for his phone. The other reaches for a book. 5 years later, their lives look nothing alike. Not because one had more discipline, not because one had more talent or more luck, because one of them changed his environment and the other let his environment change him. Most people think they control their lives. They don't. Their environment does. The room they wake up in, the people they spend the most time with, the phone within arm's reach the moment their eyes open. Most people believe their choices come from willpower, from character, from who they truly are. But the truth is far more uncomfortable. Most of your choices were never really yours. They were the predictable output of an environment that was quietly making decisions for you long before you thought you were making them yourself. A young software engineer in Ohio had the exact same skill set as hundreds of engineers working in Silicon Valley. Same education, same coding ability, same ambition. But every evening after work, his environment offered him the same options. A handful of friends discussing sports and complaining about management. A quiet apartment with a television that was always the easiest thing to turn on. Nobody around him was building anything. Nobody around him expected him to. He made one decision that changed the trajectory of his entire life. He moved to San Francisco with almost no savings and no guaranteed job, and within weeks found himself surrounded by people who talked about funding rounds the way his old friends talked about football scores. He did not become smarter overnight. He became surrounded by an environment where building a company was the normal, expected, unremarkable thing to do with your time. 3 years later, he had founded a company worth tens of millions of dollars. Not because Silicon Valley made him talented. He was already talented. Silicon Valley made ambition the default setting instead of the exception. Modern neuroscience confirms what philosophers understood centuries ago without the equipment to prove it. The brain is a prediction machine, constantly modeling what is likely to happen next based on patterns it has observed in its surroundings. If your environment consistently rewards distraction, your brain optimizes for distraction. If your environment consistently rewards laziness, your brain optimizes for laziness. This is not a moral failing. It is biology responding exactly as it is designed to respond. Dopamine, the neurochemical most associated with motivation and reward, is released not just by achievement, but by anticipation, and your environment trains your anticipation. A room filled with screens trains your brain to anticipate stimulation. A room filled with books trains your brain to anticipate depth. Neither is good or bad in isolation. But you become, with frightening consistency, a reflection of the room you spend the most time in. This is why willpower alone has such a poor track record. Willpower is a finite resource that depletes throughout the day, while environment operates continuously, 24 hours, without ever growing tired. You can resist temptation for a few hours through sheer force of will. But you cannot out-willpower an environment that is engineered, intentionally or not, to pull you toward a particular set of behaviors every single hour of every single day. The person who tries to use willpower against a hostile environment is fighting a war he cannot win through force alone. The person who redesigns the environment changes the battlefield entirely, and very often, the war simply ends because there is nothing left to fight. A 22-year-old intern walked onto a Wall Street trading floor for the first time and noticed something immediately. Every single person around him arrived before sunrise. Nobody discussed it as impressive or unusual. It was simply what the floor expected, the same way breathing is expected. Within 2 weeks, he was arriving at 5 in the morning without anyone telling him to, not because he had developed extraordinary new discipline overnight, but because the environment had quietly redefined what normal meant. He later admitted that if he had stayed at his previous internship, surrounded by people who arrived at 9 and left at 5 without urgency, he would have continued operating at that same unremarkable pace indefinitely. His work ethic did not change. His environment's definition of acceptable work ethic changed, and he simply matched it, the way water finds the shape of whatever container holds it. The wealthy understand this principle better than almost anyone, though they rarely discuss it directly. Every successful investor will tell you that proximity to information, to capital, and to opportunity compounds over time in ways that raw talent alone never can. This is why financial centers exist. An investor who moves near other serious investors begins hearing about opportunities 18 months before they reach mainstream financial media. He begins absorbing risk frameworks through casual conversation that would otherwise take years of study to develop. It is not because the people there are inherently smarter. It is because their environment makes financial sophistication the default setting rather than the exception. Your financial trajectory is shaped less by your raw ability and more by the ceiling and floor that your environment has quietly installed in your expectations without your permission. Now imagine this. Two men want to build wealth. The first surrounds himself with friends who spend their evenings discussing the latest entertainment, who view ambition with quiet suspicion, who consider any conversation about money or growth slightly distasteful. Every time he mentions an idea, the room subtly discourages it, not through cruelty, but through indifference. Indifference is often more damaging than opposition, because opposition at least engages with the idea, while indifference simply lets it die from neglect. The second man deliberately seeks out rooms where people are already doing what he wants to do. He feels uncomfortable in these rooms at first, aware that he is the least accomplished person present. But this discomfort is exactly the signal that the environment is working. He absorbs vocabulary, habits, and standards simply by being present, the way a plant absorbs sunlight without effort, simply by being positioned correctly. 5 years later, the first man has the same ambitions he started with, slightly dimmer now, slightly more resigned. The second man has built something real, not because he was smarter, but because his environment made building the path of least resistance rather than the path of most resistance. So how do you apply this? 3 principles. Write these down. First, audit your default environment. Look honestly at where you spend most of your waking hours and who occupies that space with you. Does this environment make discipline easy, or does it make discipline a constant uphill fight? You are not lacking willpower if you struggle in a hostile environment. You are simply human, responding exactly as humans are designed to respond to their surroundings. The goal is not to develop superhuman willpower. The goal is to build an environment where you don't need it. Second, engineer friction for what you want to avoid and remove friction for what you want to build. If you want to read more, leave a book where your phone usually sits and put your phone somewhere slightly inconvenient. If you want to build a business, schedule the first hour of your day before anything else can interrupt it, removing the friction of decision entirely. Small environmental adjustments produce outsized results over time because they operate continuously without requiring your conscious attention every single moment. Third, deliberately spend time in rooms where you are the least accomplished person present. This single principle, applied consistently, will do more for your growth than almost anything else available to you. Discomfort in these rooms is not a signal to leave. It is a signal that your environment is finally pulling you upward instead of holding you at your current level. The fastest way to raise your standards is to make the people around you the new baseline you are quietly measuring yourself against. You do not rise to your goals. You fall to your environment. Most people believe powerful, successful, disciplined people are simply stronger than everyone else. They are not. They have simply stopped fighting their environment and built one that fights for them instead. Change the room, and the room will change you. The next law drops soon. Until then, stay dangerous.